We're back. This is episode 2 of the Tuesday Counseling Podcast. In full disclosure, we had this episode fully recorded already this morning and realized that it did not upload. And so we lost all of the footage. So we're starting completely over, which is okay. It might sound a little bit rehearsed because we did just talk about this morning, but we're going to try and see if it maybe leads us into a different discussion than what we already did.
Maybe we feel differently later in the day.
Yeah, maybe. Well, we talked about theories. That's the topic of today's episode. And so who knows? Maybe we'll have different opinions than we did this morning about them. But yeah, Erin has a face. What do you think?
I don't know why I started thinking about am I a different therapist at different points in the day?
Oh my, yeah. I am more like 9 a.m. versions of me versus 7 p.m. versions of me in sessions. Different gals.
Well, of course. And I feel like different days. Some days you wake up and I just feel really on. And then other days, which is a part of life, you wake up on the wrong side of the bed and you're tired and you don't sleep well. And I think there's so many factors that go into it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Erin, if you were your client, would you want to see you in the morning or would you want to see you for a night session? What version of you would you want to see?
I think it depends on what my load is that day.
Yeah.
Sure.
I have to be super careful about how many people I see in a day because if I have any more than 6 clients, if you're my evening client, I feel like I'm stealing from you at that point. You know that you get out of the session and you're like, I just stole money from the client.
Yeah. I mean, on those really, really long days, yeah, those last 2 or 3 sessions are. But see, that's the thing. I'll walk. This just happened to me today. I walked out of the session. I was like, I bombed. That wasn't my best work at all. And yet, you never know how a client feels in that session. People will come back and be like, I really enjoyed that. That was really helpful. I'm like, thank God. I'm so glad you thought that because you cannot always tell the impression that a client's going to walk away with from a session.
I can't remember even the details at all. But I had a very specific memory of having a session and then the next week I'm pretty sure I apologized to my client. I was like, I'm so sorry. I just felt like I was off my game. And who I don't even remember what client it was, but they were I thought last week was great. I have been thinking about that session all week.
Yep.
And I'm
that's always it.
It's just so
that's good.
I would be really curious to see, to have a client come and see me at 9, and then the next week see me at 12, and then the next week see me at 7, and then
kind of do a little experiment. I think that could be an interesting one. I think I'm a lot sillier at nighttime. If I've had a few clients that day, I'm ready to just laugh and kind of just shittily chat. But morning me, I've noticed, is very much what do we need to do today? And what are you bringing in with you? What's coming up for you? And me by 7 o'clock sessions, I'm what's up? Yeah, just totally still therapeutic, but just a very different version of myself from earlier that day. Case in point, this morning when we recorded this episode the first time, all of us hadn't seen any clients yet.
Yeah.
We were fresh out of bed. We're just getting started to our day. And now we've all had a full day of work and we're reconvening. Who knows what we might find?
Exactly. We might feel differently.
Yeah. Okay. Well, So originally, like I said, the plan was to kind of do like hot takes on theories, and kind of the basis for like why we practice the way that we practice versus like choosing a different theory. And so I think we can probably kind of reconstruct that conversation again. I don't think my opinion has changed all that much on it. I think what we acknowledged was that there is a huge presence of, at least in our kind of circle of therapists that we know of, like person centered therapy being pretty omnipresent. It's very like everywhere, everyone uses it, it's very popular. Um, Erin gave a really, really clear and concise description of it this morning when we recorded it. That me and Avery both said, "Oh, wow, I
That's
forgot that from grad school." Erin, for our listeners that maybe don't know what person centered is, like, can you restate that for us?
I will definitely try to be more concise. And I wish I had seen y'all's faces when I was saying this. I was like, so just like, person centered theory, the idea is that we come into the world unaware, just like blissfully unaware. And like I'm the most authentic version of ourselves. And then things start to happen. For example, like the example I was always given in grad school is you eat dinner and then 30 minutes later you tell your parents like I'm hungry, and your parent says like you're not hungry, like you just ate 30 minutes ago. um, and that kind of starts to create like that incongruence is what it's called, of like, oh, like I can't really, well, technically the term is like subception. I don't even think it's in the dictionary, but that's what I was told it was called. And it creates that like mistrust of self. And then you go on and you learn like, oh, I get praised when I come home with like straight A's, and I get scolded or I get in trouble when I come home with a B. And so you learn like what we call conditions of worth. And so it's like I'm only valuable, I'm only worthy of love, acceptance, belonging if I live in accordance with these conditions of worth. If I get A's, if I, you know, am happy and outgoing, if I'm never sad, XYZ, fill in the blank. And so living in accordance with these conditions of worth kind of like creates these three different selves, and it's your real self, your perceived self, and your ideal self. So who you want to be, who you are at your core, and who people perceive you as. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to the idea that like the way people perceive us sometimes like is very different to who we actually feel like we are on the inside. And so the goal with person-centered therapy is trying to reconnect, like get all three of those selves to realign.
That's really interesting. The first time you explained that, I didn't hear it the same way I just did, which sounds a lot more like kind of what every theory has in common, which is
Mm-hmm.
sort of the unity of
Yeah.
a previously kind of like fractured self into one that is more enlightened or actualized or whatever the word would be. Like,
Yeah.
that's a
Well,
really
like,
cool way
there
of.
are conditions of worth that like I learned that I feel like make me like a huge people pleaser, and I still love like that part of me. Like if we move into more like IFS terminology,
Yeah.
like I still love the part of me that like is helpful and wants to like drop everything for like the people that I care for, right? What like was not authentic in that, what was more like my perceived self than my real self, was doing it despite things that I needed to do, doing it despite like being exhausted or like not taking care of myself. And so though it's like your perceived self and you may have these conditions of worth that feel inauthentic or like icky, that doesn't mean that you can't still carry them with you in a more healthy and authentic way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great explanation.
Yeah.
It was
Did
even
you,
better
did
the
you
second
do,
time.
I know, I was like, did you study in between takes? That sounds
I
really.
did not.
Who, did you enjoy theories class, either of
Loved it.
you?
It was
Like
my
when you
favorite.
took it?
Oh,
But also
no.
I
This is
didn't
a
understand.
funny
Yeah.
story. We in my theories class did like one of those personality tests before we did uh, person
Oh,
centered
that's
because he
interesting.
wanted like my professor wanted to talk about incongruence, and so did the
Uh-huh.
personality test where like you choose an animal. It's like a lion, an eagle, a turtle, or a
Remember that?
chameleon. And I chose a chameleon because like I was like I am a people pleaser and like I can like, kind of adjust to whatever situation it is that I'm in. And my professor called me out in front of my entire class and said, "Erin, I don't think you're a chameleon. I just think that's your trauma." I said, "Oh." Then went on to use me and like my life as an athlete and like my conditions of worth with like athletics and everything and like used it for the lecture, which I think is why person center stuck with me so much because he applied it to my life
Sure.
in a way that like made a lot of sense to me.
Hmm.
But I
Yeah.
did get absolutely exposed in class.
Well, self-growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe self growth. Do you feel like when you meet other therapists, you can kind of tell which one of them's like really enjoyed their theories class and which ones kind of like tuned it out a little bit? I say that
Oh,
as probably the latter. I learned a
Yeah.
lot. I passed the class. I understand theories. I had such a hard time keeping them straight or like which one was which or like really understanding it. That was for such an important class, it was probably my least favorite class.
I would. I remember there being so much reading and like so much reading, but I would leave being like, "Well, what do I take away from
Yeah.
this?" Like
How
it
was
was
that different than
so
the last one I read about?
complex.
Yeah.
Yeah, I almost wanted like a chart of like, here's the baseline of the theories versus
Hmm.
it felt very in
Hmm.
depth. And I just remember having to write that huge paper. Do you remember that?
The paper.
The
Of course.
paper.
Love
The
paper.
paper.
And picking one, it felt like a lot of pressure.
Woo! Yeah. It is a lot of pressure to feel like you have to lock in on something that you've never actually tried
Yeah.
before. It's very much, I think, akin to choosing like a college major when you were like, I've
Yeah.
never even cracked a book on this topic, but I guess
And here
that's
we
what I'm
go
doing.
for the rest
Yeah.
of my life. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's intimidating.
Because I don't
It's
know if we said this, but most grad schools, or I feel like the grad schools that our circle of people went to, it's like you have to choose a theory and you have to stay with that.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me, it was through the entire program. And if
Yeah.
like I had to write a paper through the entire program about like learning about the theory that I chose and then applying it as I started practicing in my internship. And
Mm.
I remember I was like thinking like maybe I'm not a person-centered therapist because I couldn't be that non-directive in session.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
then my advisor at the time was like, "Yeah, you can change your theory. You just have to start the entire paper over." And just
Yeah,
like the
thanks.
emphasis on like, I don't know if y'all got this vibe, but like eclectic therapists or therapists that pull from different like theories are not necessarily good therapists.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mm.
My memory is pulling me towards a very specific story that Aaron has told me before, which I don't think we'll get in trouble for telling, but if we think we will, we'll cut
Erin
it.
looks scared.
Do you remember you had we are gonna have to cut this story. We had
Yeah.
a job you had a job interview with a clinic
Yeah.
that had a very strong opinion about eclectic therapists. Is that ringing a bell?
Are you meaning the one that said you can either work with adults or kids?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's what I mean.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
said,
Underlying message. Yeah, fine.
oh,
That's
no.
fine.
Um,
Not our approach, though.
yeah, like the message that I got was they might be good people, but those aren't good therapists. Like not word for word, but they did say not good therapists. And I was like, "Oh, cool." That's
And what they
me.
meant by that was like to kind of spread your focus more like mile wide than inch deep versus like really honing on one thing and like really being good at that one thing.
Yeah. I mean, which is great. Like if you are really really passionate about something and want to be a specialist in that one thing and only see that client base or only practice that modality and and see clients or a population that naturally like gravitate towards that type of modality. You know, you think about like borderline personality disorder, eating disorders, you see a lot of DBT, a lot of CBT, a lot of ACT, you know? So like if you really want to hone in and like specialize in that modality specifically to properly and in an expert way serve this specific population, yeah, I think that's great. And also, a lot of us see a wide range of clients, and therapy is certainly not a one size fits all.
Not at all.
So,
Yeah. And especially during this time of like as an associate and in internship, in a way, like the goal is for you to see different clients. I think if you had decided in grad school, like this is the only population I want to see and this is the only theory I want to use, I think that's great. I think it would be really hard because as we've said, like going in and actually doing the theory or seeing that population, seeing that presenting issue is a lot different than learning about it. And so there's like a learning curve to figure out what does work. And yes, it is not a one size fits all.
It's definitely not. I remember that triggered something in me, Avery, when you said that. Because it reminded me of what was that class? I mean, it was early. It was probably like first semester of grad school of like learning probably about theories. It was like pre-theories though. And I remember answering a question about CBT. Like my professor had asked us like what our thoughts on CBT were. Me, I didn't know anything yet. I hadn't taken theories. I remember saying like, well, I always kind of imagined that CBT was sort of like a one size fits all thing. Like it usually works for people. And everyone in the class goes, no, no. And I'm like,
okay.
I don't know. Like what, have y'all been in theories? No. Like that exact phrase of it being one size fits all has always stuck with me because I got publicly scolded for thinking that. And honestly, I understand that now. Like it's absolutely not. Like I'll, in a given workday, use primarily internal family systems in almost all of my sessions, but I'll pull really any Gestalt. I'll pull some empty chair technique. I'll pull as a solution focused. I pull that all the time. Some CBT when it has a time and place. I think to really kind of pigeonhole yourself into one theory is fine. I think you lose a lot of clients that way, though. You help a lot of people that respond to it, but you're going to maybe lose people that don't.
Yeah, and meeting clients where they are, right? I think some theories, and I would say that's why person-centered is such a great one to fall back on, right? Because it focuses on the relationship. And I think once the relationship is built, to try to figure out, okay, what is helpful to them? I always tell clients up front, like, I'm going to throw out suggestions. If it doesn't work, that is totally fine. We will find something that works. But really being in tune with them and their experience and what they're hoping for.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And I think part of the, conversation that we had already had while recording this the first time was kind of like, what is your primary kind of fallback theory? If I really don't know how to conceptualize this case, I can usually find something when I look at it this way. For me, it's IFS, which I think definitely as a client and reading about it, did not do anything for me. I thought it was too out there. I thought it was really kind of woo-woo psychology type stuff. And as soon as I experienced it in my own therapy as a client, I fell in love with it and really can't imagine myself using much else. And so I think that I personally would probably call myself eclectic for sure, because I'm not, I'm not unwilling to look outside of IFS, but I would say most of my most successful work, in my opinion, has been found there. So I'd love to kind of hear what where you land, where are you most comfortable, where do you find yourself gravitating most often with clients?
honestly, when I am trying to conceptualize a case, when I have a case that I'm struggling with and I really want to figure out like what is the function of this behavior, where is this coming from? if not person-centered, because I really, really do think that, so, which honestly though, like person-centered and IFS, I kind of can link up a little bit, and I feel like used together in a way that gives a really good picture. But just the idea of conditions of worth, like we all have them, we all have this idea of like, if I can do this thing, then like I can be fill in the blank. And I think a lot of our inner turmoil, like inner conflict, and just feelings of like inauthenticity come from the fact that we're living in accordance with, things that we were told explicitly or, covertly. And so I really, really do fall back on person centered conceptualization wise a lot. But I also just like love and adore IFS and had the same experience as you, Madeline, just like being a client and doing it. Like, this requires definitely some buy in.
Yeah.
But I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Avery, do you have thoughts on this?
I do. Sorry, if y'all saw me being confused, I lost the link, or not the link, but I lost like the little tab, and I have about 10,000 tabs open right now. So that was my look of confusion. Um, yes, I think person center is one that I picked whenever in grad school, you pick the theory. I'll also say I work a lot of recognizing like how past experiences impact current functioning, which is more psychoanalytical. And so trying to I think I pull and conceptualize a lot from that of why are we engaging in the behaviors we are? Why do we respond the way that we do? I also use attachment. And so that's very eclectic. But that's typically where I fall back. I'm trying to understand how we got to where we are and where we want to go.
Totally. I think that's really cool. I think that's cool that we all kind of see similar populations, but use different modalities within each of them. And you kind of just gravitate towards what feels, because when you're using a theory that you're like, ooh, this feels like kind of a stretch for me to try this one. Like, I can feel myself kind of out of my depth.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so cool to see us all have found the thing that we're like, oh, you can kind of like relax into it, like, okay, I know what I'm doing here, like within this theory.
I think also working with kids, I use non-directive child-centered play therapy, which I think is fairly closely aligned with person-centered, but recognizing that children's natural language is play and meeting them where they're at. I've seen so much growth from using that, and that's a theory that I was nervous to use starting out, but feels so good when I use it, and I've seen so much growth and progress.
Wow. Children's natural language is play. I've never heard it said that way before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I've never heard that one. Granted, I'm not a.
Well, that's fair. I'm like, I can't believe it. Yeah, y'all don't work with kids.
Yeah, that's really beautiful though. To like, it sounds like a lot of like observing and being really attentive, and just kind of the art of like self-study is something that I'm learning about. And it's kind of the opposite. It's like just studying by like watching someone else play. You get a lot of information just by observing it.
Yeah, and that kids naturally play out themes, and so all of the pillars and the goals, right, is increased self-regulation and their ability to identify feelings. So it's a lot of what you do in person-centered of reflecting how someone's feeling, reflecting content, but also reflecting the themes that they engage in or what they're doing in the playroom.
Yeah, I love that. I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I wonder if there's some kind of, this is my little like scientific part. I have one of those. I have a scientific part that's coming out. And she's saying, like, I wonder if there's some study that exists between therapists' personality types, maybe like an Enneagram, versus the theory that they practice most often. I'm like, I wonder if maybe people that are more like analytical and precise and evidence-based maybe are this on the Enneagram and lean more towards this theory versus maybe more like, feely, kind of like something else would practice something different.
Oh, I don't know if there's anything out there, but I'm sure there's a connection.
I'll make one later. I'll just
Be a
pull up
researcher.
Google. Yeah. Well, okay. Then let me ask you this: do you know your Enneagram, or does that mean anything
Ooh,
for you?
I do not know my. Were you all working, or were you all there when we did the? We had someone come in at our office and talk about the Enneagram. It was years ago.
Oh, yeah.
I wish I remembered.
I have not taken it in a long time. That or like Myers Briggs. I should probably retake it to see what I would get, but very much ISFJ is what I got the first time, and I think a type 9, which,
That's
yeah, 9 on the Enneagram is like, um, Enneagram is basically just sort of a personality test, so is Myers Briggs, but both of those kind of would say about me that I'm very like non confrontational, don't want to rock the boat, like very warm and fuzzy, and can be analytical, but that's not my first place that I would go. And I'm someone who really, really enjoys the more like experiential, kind of humanistic versions of therapy. I wonder if there's something about that maybe draws me to that versus a CBT or, I don't know, psychoanalytic theory or something.
Yeah. Huh. I feel like I'm gonna have to go look it up after this.
Mm.
I know I've taken it before.
I
We took the
don't
Myers Briggs in grad
what my
school.
Myers Briggs is anymore, but I do know that I'm an Enneagram 6.
Ooh, interesting.
Which one is that?
Okay.
I believe the name is like the Loyalist, but
Hmm.
uh, I do know that she's an anxious girly.
Mm.
Um, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank. I know a lot about the
Huh.
Enneagram, but
You're on the spot. It's okay.
I
It's
know.
late in the day.
Yeah. Well, I think that's cool just to know that like you will gravitate towards what you're supposed to practice. You'll know when you're kind of wearing a theory that's not totally fitting you. And
Yeah.
you know when you've put on the theory that fits you just right. Kind of a Goldilocks situation, in my opinion.
I have to try them all.
Um, yeah. Well, cool. Um, I what do we want to do? Do we want to take a question? Do we want to walk through theories more?
I think
What
maybe
are the
we take a
vibes?
question.
Okay, let me go find our questions. Um, to those of you who have filled out for us, thank you so much. We have 12 responses, which is so exciting. Um, I think we can read. So we answered this one initially, and I think we can probably answer it again. But this one says, I went to my therapist with concerns of strong attachment towards my teachers, and it's to the point of stalking their socials and stuff. Dot dot dot. But what do I do if I've now grown attached to my therapist in a similar way? The stalking is pretty out of hand, and a lot of guilt comes with it too. I have a fearful avoidant attachment style, if that's at all helpful. I think that's a fascinating question. Maybe let's talk about fearful avoidant attachment, like what that means to you, I guess. Maybe that's a good starting place. I'm not an attachment therapist, so
Agree.
you agree. Tell us what that means.
They said fearful avoidant
Hmm.
or an avoidant attachment,
Yeah, I think they mean like an anxious avoidant.
anxious avoidant. Yeah, of wanting to be close to people, but then when people become close, you push them away. It's like the short version of how I would explain
Mhm.
it. Uh, for this person, when we think about that attachment, I think it would be healthy and could be a great way to process to bring it up with their therapist, to experience that connection, that it is such a different relationship, but that can come up in the room and can be used.
Yeah.
Um, and I also can understand, right? It makes sense, especially when we think about attachment, that the therapeutic relationship is different than likely any other relationship you have.
Mhm.
And to have a place you can come and therapist who can understand different attachments and help work through that with you.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really well said. It's definitely something that kind of seems to sort of stem like in childhood when we're learning to build connections and trust and attachment to people, that you can kind of walk away with a style that in this person's case might make it hard to like trust people, and once you do it feels like too close and that feels scary in a way. Yeah. Well, yeah, what do you think, Erin?
I have a question for y'all.
Hmm.
Because I believe that whoa, I believe that attachment exists on a spectrum. Do y'all
Mm-hmm.
believe that like attachment is fixed?
Hmm.
Do you mean like it can't change?
Well, not like it can't change, but like you will always, always, always have this default. Or
Hmm. Yeah, that's it. I think it also depends on. Is that your kitty in the background?
EJ's hungry.
Oops. So I had to kick him out before this.
He's like, wait a minute. I don't think that it's fixed. I think it can be healed, and I think it requires a lot of nurturing and intention. I think it depends on the person, though. Also, like
Mhm.
how was your attachment formed in childhood? I think that plays a big role in
Yeah.
adulthood and your ability
Yeah.
to change it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's kind of similar to IFS in some ways, in the sense of like maybe there is this piece of you that holds this attachment style that if we explore it and kind of understand it and find compassion for it, kind of find different experiences. Almost, what are those called? Not disproving experiences,
Just
but like,
confirming.
yeah, just confirming experiences. Like, I think that absolutely we have the capacity to change and to learn and to grow and heal and to trust people in ways that we haven't always been safe enough to try to do. Um, so definitely, I think it's, and I find myself kind of stumbling over that piece of attachment when I try to do that with people, of like, as if secure attachment is like this end all be all. I think that's where I get lost with it, because I'm like, okay, good for you. Like, is that the point, that like we're all trying to become securely attached? Like, because to tell clients like, well, yeah, this is your attachment style, but we can fix it. Like that doesn't sit right with me. I'm like, well, nothing's wrong. Like you didn't do anything wrong to have this.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of the book "What Happened to You."
Mhm.
There's
I
nothing
was thinking
wrong
the
with
same
you.
thing, Avery.
Yep.
Yeah, anytime someone says
Yeah.
that, I always think of that book. I think it's a different lens to look at and the hope for what's to come,
Hmm.
but it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
what's so cool about therapy in general too, is like therapy is for a lot of clients like one of the only representations of a securely attached relationship. You know,
Mhm.
like you get to have like healthy confrontation and healthy conflict. Like if you and your therapist like don't agree on something, you know, like you get to sit there and address it and
Mhm.
talk about it, and like with unconditional positive regard and everything, you really do get a cool way to like process what it is like to maybe have a disorganized attachment, or you know, just not a secure attachment, and be in a relationship with someone who does kind of have that secure attachment to you. It's very
Mhm.
interesting.
Totally.
And a place to process it where you feel safe, like where you experience that unconditional positive regard.
Hmm. Which is why I love this question, because I'm assuming that this person feels securely attached to their therapist.
Mm-hmm.
If all is going well, that's hopefully the case. And so I think that's such a beautiful kind of environment to process that exact concern with them. Like the trust is there, the positive regard is there. They're not going to be mad or judgy for that.
Mhm.
Some therapists even look up their own therapists. Some therapists even get really curious if they can find their own therapist on Instagram, and they try and find her and they can't, and that's okay. I asked the group this morning, I said so confidently, I said, and who among us has never looked up their own therapist, right? And Aaron and Avery were like, no, no, we haven't done that. So I said, no, me neither. No, I would never do that.
I can also understand that people would. As a therapist, I am assuming or expecting that people will try to look me up. I think that's why therapists are oftentimes on private because it makes sense, right? That you're going to be curious about someone who knows everything about you. And I think that's natural and totally
Yeah,
understandable.
yeah. I think it's so normal to want to have access to people in ways that you feel accessed by them,
Yeah.
almost. When you're in a really, really deeply emotionally intimate relationship, like you are with a therapist, that feels so odd to have
Mhm.
no information on them and have
Yeah.
no context for their life or who they are. Do they have, can you hear PJ? Is he being that
Yeah.
loud?
He is very upset.
PJ, be quiet.
I think that's what's interesting too, though, about the therapeutic relationship in general is like having so much access to your clients and your clients not having a lot of
Mhm.
access to you, which I think can
Yeah,
create kind of what this person is talking about of like, especially with teachers too, like there kind of
yeah,
is that interesting dynamic of like not a power differential necessarily, but like kind of that unequal standing. I don't know.
yeah. No, I would agree. And I think that that is probably what piques the curiosity of somebody to look up their therapist, myself included. Like,
Yeah.
I just wanted to know. Like, I don't know. I don't know anything about you. I'd love to know something about you. And yet, I recognize that we are all therapists that are pretty liberal with our self disclosure. I feel like, well, maybe not Avery. I don't know if Avery feels that way. I think Aaron and I are both very open to like answering most questions about ourselves if it's appropriate and like helpful to the relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. If someone asks a question, I think it comes from somewhere and I'm happy to answer it. And I think also like it can make clients feel closer to you, right? Like to not know anything about someone who knows everything about you. I don't know that I've ever not answered a question that I was asked.
Yeah.
And I don't know where the line is that I wouldn't answer,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but I've never had
Okay.
anyone ask a question I wasn't open to.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me pose you the question that this person might then go ask their therapist of like,
Yeah.
hey, therapist, I have to tell you something. Like, I looked you up on Instagram, whatever. I feel really guilty about it or whatever it is. I have a lot of shame surrounding that. You're the therapist. What do you say to them?
I think the first place I go is understanding, right? Like I can understand that you would want to look me up. And then the second place I go is self compassion, right? To offer yourself grace and kindness. That's a human want or a need. And it doesn't mean anything about you as a person that you looked me
Mm-hmm.
up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would you say anything different, Erin, than what Avery said?
Um, Not necessarily. I love what Avery said. I might get curious about um, like the function of that behavior. Like what what is missing. Let's get curious about kind of what is happening here, or what you're feeling like you need from me that like you're not getting. Um, and then like also having a conversation, around self disclosure, around like ethical boundaries, and all those types of things, which are like obviously not fun, but just getting curious about like um, where is this coming from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think offering kind of like that normalizing component to it of like, that makes so much sense.
Yes.
And like, also, anytime a client would or has said that to me, it's very much like, thank you so much for telling me that. Like,
Yeah.
what did that feel like to even say that to me? Like, how was that to know that you wanted to walk in a session and start with that? Like, sometimes a question I'll ask people is like, sometimes secret, if I've asked you this and you're my client, if I ask this, sometimes it means I'm stumped. And not because I don't really know where to go, it's just because there's so many directions I could go.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I'll ask, like, if I had the perfect thing to say to you in this moment, like, what might that sound like? What would it be? I'd be really, yeah. And I'm imagining for that person, if I were their therapist and I'd ask that, I'd be really curious to know what they would want me to say. Like, what would be the perfect thing that I could say to them after them telling me that?
Yeah.
Is it that I'm not mad at you? Is it that I understand? Is it that I felt that way too? And I think that question can give you a lot of context. And no shame. Like,
No.
I don't think any therapist would be mad about that or upset about that.
No.
I think that's what's so cool is you get to go through and you get to say, okay, so this is a situation that has caused you a lot of guilt and shame before.
Yeah.
And so, like, how have people responded in the past that have kind of created this narrative in your head that this is something to be shameful of? And then to go ahead, like, to move forward and be someone that doesn't respond in that way that they are so used to hearing is also helpful in and of itself, I hope.
And healing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really beautiful. All of us put on our softest voices just now. Did anyone else catch that?
No.
We all softened in that moment, which is so cool. That's so cool. We just do that. You know, when they teach you in grad school, when someone's like really expressing a lot of emotion, how you're supposed to respond, which is to like really change your body language and like lean in, soften, and go quiet. And that's what all of us did just now. Oh, what can you do? Sorry. We want to be thoughtful and good listeners. You know what? Probably the most annoying thing about being friends with us is.
Oh God.
What? Now I'm scared.
I feel like, well, you know what? Maybe this isn't fair to apply this to you guys. I love my job so much, and I love to like talk about the work I get to do, not in specific client situations, but like the theory that I really am passionate about, that I'll be at dinner parties or I'll be like out with people and they'll say something. I'm like, okay, give me like 5 minutes. Like, I really, really, really want to explain this to you. And like, sometimes the people are like, okay, like, I really don't care about that at all, but like, thank you so much. Like, that has got to be so annoying when I'm not psychoanalyzing you, I'm doing the opposite. I'm like trying to explain my job to you, and I really want you to feel excited about it too.
Oh.
I gotta go.
Oh. I was thinking that.
Oh my gosh, it's already 5 o'clock.
I lost track of time.
Oh, we gotta
That's
go.
okay.
We gotta go. Okay.
Good luck.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.